Hello, I'm Francesca Thyssen-Bonamica, and I'm here today on the backstage edition for Freakwave, project that was initiated this week for stage, together with three really wonderful friends of mine that I've known for many years, Carmichael von Haushoff, Chris Watson, and Marcus Raymond. I'll start by introducing Carmichael, because since the 1970s, he's worked as a composer using recording technology as his main instrument and as a visual artist using projections, light, video, film, and photography, as well as other media. He participated in Documenta 10, it was in 1997, many biennials, including Sarajevo, Moscow, Venice, Istanbul, Liverpool. He's been known to many of us since many years and doing a lot of performances and exhibitions around the world. He's been in Sonar Festival as well. The list is very, very long. But he recently curated a second part of a sound installation that he created many years ago called Freak Out, which is now called Freakwave, which he actually did it in collaboration with the TBA 21 Academy. And this has been a project that has been performed and seen in Ocean Space in Venice. Chris Watson is a composer as well. He's a founding member of influential Sheffield, the influential Sheffield UK-based experimental group Cabaret Voltaire during the late 1970s as well. And the two of them know each other since then, I imagine. Since then, he has developed a very particular and passionate interest in recording wildlife sounds of animals and habitats from around the world. And as a composer and sound recordist, Chris specializes in creating spatial sound installations with a feature of strong sense and spirit of the place. His television includes working with programs of David Attenborough, life series, including The Life of Birds. And he won a BAFTA award for the best factual sound in 1999 and location sound recording for the BBC series Frozen Planet. Watson has recorded and featured in many BBC Radio 4 and BBC World Series productions, including The Wire, which won him the Broadcasting Press Guild's Broadcaster of the Year award in 2012. And his music is regularly featured on BBC Radio 3. Watson's music is released in the London-based label and publisher Touch. His CD Weather Report is voted as one of the 1,000 best albums ever to hear before you die by The Guardian. So Watson's installations have also been commissioned by a number of galleries, including TBA 21, as we worked with the Morning Line project many years ago. And this was an ambisonic sound system that was sculptured into a huge installation by Matthew Ritchie. But maybe we'll talk a bit about that a bit later. And Marcus Raymond is the director of the TBA 21 Academy, and he founded and co-founded together with me in 2011. And it fosters an interdisciplinary dialogue and exchange surrounding the most urgent ecological, social, and economic issues facing our oceans today. Marcus leads the nonprofit engagement with artists, activists, scientists, and policymakers worldwide, resulting in the creation of the new commissions, new bodies of knowledge, and new policies advancing conservation and protection of the oceans. In March 2019, the Academy launched Ocean Space and a new global port for ocean literacy and advocacy. Located in the restored Church of San Lorenzo in Venice, which you see behind him in his image, Ocean Space will be activated in the Itinerant Academy and its network of partners, including universities, NGOs, museums, government agencies, and research institutes from around the world. He also serves as chair of the Alligator Head Foundation, a scientific partner of the TBA 21 Academy, is established in Jamaica in the East Portland Fish Sanctuary. But based in London, Raymond has presented on a number of art and ocean festivals and conferences internationally, including the 2017 Starmus Festival, Explorers Club in New York, and the annual UN Climate Change Conference. So thank you, all three of you, for joining us here. And I'm just going to say a couple of words about the topic that we're going to embark on today. And we're basically contextualizing Freakwave, which was last week's episode on stage. And this is a big collaborative project and effort. And I think to describe it best, I leave it up to Marcus Raymond to introduce Freakwave to you all.
Thank you very much, Francesca. And thank you for the introduction and also for bringing us here together. And it's really nice to see how, I guess this is a knot that ties, no? It's you and I started the Academy together nearly 10 years ago. And actually, on the first ever journey that we undertook, Chris was part of it. So sound has been in the DNA of the Academy from its inception. And its last iteration is the work and the collaboration with Carl Michael and with 84 colleagues of his. But it's also been the case that Carl Michael, together with Jonsi, as the super band Dark Morph, were part of the inaugurational season of Ocean Space. So there's many folds and layers and loops that are all coming together and colliding here. But we're here to talk about Freakwave. And Freakwave was the Academy's, or one of the Academy's, proposals to stage this fantastic new initiative, which you started as a response to the COVID-19 crisis. And that has gone so much beyond really this initial relief impulse that you had. But ever since I saw for the first time Freak Out, and it was at the time I was at the Marrakesh Biennial, I was really very intrigued by the concept. Then I saw it again in Vienna, and Carl Michael and I have been in touch regularly ever since. And then there was this fabulous moment where Carl Michael joined us on one of our exploratory voyages to the Lao group, together with the curator Utamita Ba, yourself, but also Jonsi. And that was the moment when, out of spending time together and being out in the Lao group of the Fijis, together with all of the recording equipment and all the acoustic curiosity that Carl Michael and Jonsi bring together, Dark Morph was born. But ever since then, we've been kind of thinking about how could Freak Out live on, because it was a closed circle of 12 iterations according to the frequencies that were divided amongst a closed group of artists. And so we started thinking back and forth, and the possibility of a new form called Freakwave was born. And this was just a fantastic conversation that we continued having without really having the possibility or a moment to really put this into reality. And all of a sudden, everything came to a grinding halt during the first shutdown. Right? And we continued our conversation, Carl Michael and I, and at some point we said, why don't we do it? This is the moment where a lot of people are out of work. The gigs have all been canceled. There was quite some anxiety going around. Carl Michael had just finished his world famous tour of his flat. He concluded the world tour through his flat from the bathroom to the kitchen to the bedroom and the living room. And having played whatever 5 gigs in 5 days with special appearances of the cat, we said, okay, now it's the time, let's go. And this idea, just, you know, as it is when you have time on your hands and a very daring collaborator, it grew and grew and grew and grew. And from 12 people and being part of the work, we said, okay, why don't we do a freak wave for the 7 Cs? So immediately the freak wave turned into 7 waves, turned from 12 participants into 84 participants. And that was the idea. That was the idea. And then we said, okay, let's give it a shot. We put together a list and we started writing emails. We started writing emails to all of these colleagues from all around the world. The freak waves were coordinated to trajectories that were corresponding to the other work that we were doing and the other work that was supposed to be shown at Ocean Space, which was Oceans in Transformation by the Architectural Collective Territorial Agency. They had 7 trajectories proposed to be exhibited in the space. And so we did a kind of a synchronizing of our efforts. That's how we arrived at the 7 Cs, the freak wave, the 7 Cs, also corresponding then to 7 geographies. And that's how we were inviting and looking for the artists. And then we wrote these emails, and it was really phenomenal to see the positive response. I mean, it speaks for really the vibrant relationships and the position that Carmichael has in this community, that we had so many positive responses from icons in the field like Chris Watson and many others, but also from very young artists. But ever since we introduced Carmichael to the ocean, he has become such an avid advocate for the causes and for raising awareness for the plight of the ocean, which many people don't know about, right? That he infused all of these emails with such an urgency, with such an enthusiasm, and with such a measure of awareness for especially, and this is, I think, where we can come back to the work that you've been doing in a subject that you've been advocating, but he's been infusing it with the awareness for sound pollution in the ocean, that we had really a tsunami wave of positive responses, and everybody got involved. And and so we arrived very quickly at 84 colleagues that joined in very enthusiastically. And we had a fantastic friend of Carmichael's, Ulf Bilting, who immediately started programming the digital mixers on which the 84 channels now live. And Carmichael, I'm going to pass it over to you to explain a little bit more the process of making the work, of how the artists contributed to the mixers and how the work works. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how the work works?
Sure. Thank you. So, great introductions. I mean, it feels like I don't really need to say anything more because it's so you know, the view is so large. But to invite artists that work with sound, and these are not only like sound artists that work in galleries. It's also musicians, composers, people that work with like rock music or contemporary music and so on. Even architects that work with sound, and it's all people from all over the sound field. And normally, of course, they would not see a chance to collaborate. I mean, You know, you wouldn't find an ocean recordist kind of standing up playing with some kind of rock band or something. Everything is basically unthinkable unless you create a system like this where everything is really open. So there are not particularly many rules in either in Freak Out or now Freak Wave. The rules are that there are, as you said, 7 mixers, and those 7 fader stereo channels are given to the artist, but they are separated. The frequency range, the audible frequency range, are divided up into 12 sections. So the artist can, for instance, work with really low frequency, like mid frequencies or high frequencies, but they are not allowed to cross over with their sounds to another frequency range. This enables everything to work really well when you put everything together, because the bass sounds doesn't take out each other; they actually more collaborate. So the collaborative function with this mixer is well designed, I think. Also, the artists were told that they could actually submit any kind of sound, whatever they want. It cannot be longer than 1 minute. 1 minute was because there are so many artists, and all the sounds are actually fed down into everyone's computer if you want to use these mixers. So 1 minute of MP3 file times 12, that's enough for a computer to easily download it. So 1 minute, and the sound had to do with the ocean, but also with what's in the ocean, the life forms that are in the ocean. They're actually water in the oceans. So people could actually, if they were somewhere else, they could actually use melting ice from the Himalayas if they wanted to, because it's all connected to the oceans. The rivers are connected to the oceans. All water, rain is connected. Everything that actually floats around in water is actually connected with the ocean. So they were allowed to kind of use anything they wanted, and mutate it and work with it and fiddle around with the sounds any way they wanted. They could even use the concept of water, or maybe just creating something by just thinking about water or the ocean. So the physicality of the recordings are not really necessarily water and ocean. It could be that the composer has actually just projected thoughts into the sound. It sounds really kind of wobbly and kind of stony, but I believe that thoughts actually travel really well, and they can actually move into to artworks and sounds and whatever. I believe in this kind of. I think it's actually much more efficient than the internet. So that was it, and then it was just about to collect these sounds and then create these 7 mixers for all the 84 artists. So
yeah, I think Kamake, what was really astonishing, right, was something that I think we found ourselves in, was this huge impression of isolation, of all of a sudden being travel and movement is such a big part of, or was such a big part of our practice, and all of a sudden we were all confined to spaces which was clearly had a huge impression on all of us, and was kind of a constant topic in our conversations. And all of a sudden, to counter this with this huge spontaneous act of solidarity, of collaboration, of coming together, like you said, from all across the spectrum of rock stars to the most kind of niche sound technicians, right? That was really astonishing. And in all of the communication and all of the inner works of this project, it was really amazing to see the dynamic that this developed. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's important that I mean, of course, in the selection of art, there's so many artists, musicians, composers. There's like thousands and thousands, right? So it was quite important to invite artists that I knew or knew of that could work fast, because we didn't have much time. I mean, you actually came up with the title Freak Wave because there is something in the ocean called the freak wave, and you knew this, and I thought it was brilliant. But then we just had like a month or something to do all this, because we had like a deadline, right? So we needed artists that could actually work fast and so on. So it was quite interesting to make that kind of survey, and I must say, he's not with us any longer, but working. But also Alonso Vasquez came up with a really an interesting amount of artists, like 10, 12 artists that I never heard of, that actually were specialized in ocean recordings and working with this kind of area. So that was really good for me, and I like to work with unknown. I mean, I have to take risks when I do things, because I think that puts an edge to things, and I'm not really afraid of failing and so on. So.
Yeah.
Working with so many different artists were many of them technicians or ocean biologists, the new ones that you were introduced to, or that's kind of interesting that you brought them in, but where did they come from? What field?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not really sure, and I'm still trying to figure out some of the artists, what they're actually doing, of the artists that I don't know of. I just have the communication with them, and I feel that they're really nice people, so it's really cool. But they I think maybe Marcus knows more about those artists than I do, or maybe they're totally unknown to us, and maybe hopefully we can still we can develop more collaborations with them.
But not
Because I haven't.
Sorry, not uninterrupted.
Pardon?
I just wanted to introduce Chris because he's very well known to us, and I mean, also since his work in Cabaret Voltaire in the Wild Days in London many or a couple of decades ago. But I'm really always been completely enamored with your work, Chris, and the compositions that you do. And I'll never forget sitting on the floor with Russell Haswell in a performance that you did in the British countryside, where it was the first time that I came in touch with Tony Myatt and his sound installations that gave such an incredible truth and reality to the sound, that you were then composing this piece that had a bell that was ringing from a church that had been submerged under the sea, and this complexity of these sounds that you wove together into a composition. Now, you've worked with the sounds of nature for all of your life that I can imagine. You know, you were born with a microphone in your hand. But I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how this came into your life and how it took over, because how did this idea of creating compositions and music come from just using the sounds of nature? Because I don't think anybody had done that before you. That was really quite new.
Thank you, Francesca.
And a very, very particular, unique skill to be able to do that.
Well, thank you, Francesca. You made a very good point, which you moved on from very quickly, but something that's vital. You said, born with a microphone in my hand. The thing is, we are all good listeners. All of us around these screens and all of us listening to this piece are all good listeners. We are all evolved from people who were good listeners. 40,000 years ago, we'd all be living in caves in Lascaux or New Mexico or Asia or Australia. And when we were all asleep communally in a cave at night and a saber-toothed tiger or a pack of spotted hyenas crept into that cave looking for a meal, this is a serious point, we are the people that evolved from those that heard those predators approach and woke up and got out of the back of the cave. The people that didn't hear those predators approaching didn't wake up and are not here today to contribute or listen to Freakwave because they weren't good listeners. So there's a very serious point there about that. We're all born with microphones and speakers, and we've lost a lot of that. That's one of the great beauties about pieces like Freakwave. It brings people's attention back to listening. It's no longer, for the most part, a matter of life and death, unless we're crossing a road somewhere, that we use our hearing. That's passed into history, unfortunately. Although, of course, with the pandemic, a lot of people rediscovered sounds on their doorstep. The other important point, which I think you were alluding to, Francesca, is this idea of listening, and particularly the sounds of water. It has a deep, apart from the artistic references that we've all been describing, why people have been working with this and why the scientists are engaged with it. The other thing is, we're all deeply immersed in the sound of water from the moment we're conceived. We first start to hear the world when we are 16 weeks old in our mother's womb. When we first hear the world diffused through a fluid, amniotic fluid within inside our mothers. So we experience the world through a fluid. And then we're born into a world of changing air pressure sound. I think one of the reasons why people migrate back to the sounds of water, waves on the beach, sea wash, the sort of sounds that a lot of the artists used in Freakwave, is because perhaps, and I'm not a psychologist, that we're returning to a sound that we heard before we were even born. And that's why those sounds, those deeply rich harmonic sounds like sea wash and all the frequency selections that were made for Freakwave really do literally strike a chord in our subconscious because we migrate to those sounds. I worked on a radio program a few years ago for BBC called A Small Slice of Tranquility, and I made 2 half-hour programs about tranquility, whether it was a place, a sound, or a feeling. I thought it's psychologically present or absent within us. But one of the most important things that were interesting, some of the scientists I've talked about I talked to in the program were discussing how certain sounds affect the limbic system at the base and rear of our brains, and how those sounds, those vibrations, can generate a feeling of tranquility. And those harmonically rich, small dynamic sounds, a lot of which are contained in sounds in the ocean, whether it's underwater currents or sea wash or the movement of the sounds around coral reefs, they're the sort of sounds that stimulate the limbic systems within our brain. So again, it's another reason why we migrate to those sounds and seek them out. And that's one reason, I'm sure, why Freakwave's been popular. I became interested in sounds in the ocean. I mean, as a teenager, a long time ago, in the 1970s, I used to watch on BBC television. They had a series by the French explorer, Jacques Cousteau. Jacques Cousteau is very famous, inventor of the aqualung, great adventurer and explorer, and latterly took his yacht, Calypso, and sailed around the seas and oceans with a bunch of scientists. And they would jump in off the side of the Calypso with 16mm film cameras and make films, which the BBC then bought in and showed. And it was the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau. And it was always accompanied by the most dreadful, ghastly musical accompaniment. And as a 16-year-old, I bought into this because Cousteau wrote a book and made a film called The Silent Undersea World. And so I just believed it because this person was on television, spoke with authority, and appeared to have the credibility of it. Some years later, I got my first hydrophones, which I borrowed from the film crew, and took them to the coast and put them in the water, and was blown away. It was like the first time, going back to when I was 12 and 13, my parents bought me the first tape recorder, which I put on a bird table in our back garden in Sheffield. When I brought those hydrophone recordings back and played them back, I was just taken, transported into this other world, this other place that of course we can't be, and realized that all this silent undersea world was complete nonsense. Nobody, apart from the military at that time, started to listen underwater. And I became very much engaged with that world because it's a world of sound. We quite often think we live on planet Earth, and of course we don't. We live on planet Ocean. 70% of this planet is occupied by the seas and the oceans. Sound travels almost 5 times faster through seawater than it does through air. So the seas and the oceans aren't only the largest habitat on this planet, they are the most sound rich. Professor Chris Clark at Cornell, who I spoke to for another podcast recently, said this really interesting thing. He said, we have yet to discover a deaf sea animal. Everything in the seas and the oceans lives in a world of sound and vibration. And the tiniest crustacean in a rock pool, coast of Northumberland, which I've been recording, to the songs and signals of the largest and loudest animals which have ever lived, which are the great whales, some of which we've been to record on the Silver Bank, the songs of humpback whales. Everything lives in this soup of sound and vibrations, which we're excluded from mostly because, of course, we're still on our little dry bits listening to changing air pressure. We can't really experience sound directly. It's transduced through things like hydrophones, which respond to vibration. So, and again, Freakwave is made up of all these series of vibrations. That's why I was drawn to it, apart from, being invited by the Academy and Carmichael to contribute to this international work of significance. And then make the podcast, of course, where I can connect with some of my artist friends, but also some of the science community as well, which I've been engaging with in recent years, because using and working with those people to find locations to go and record, which we did from the first trip of the Academy, of course, out of it's Skalfandi Bay, north of Husavik, with Marianne Rasmussen, the great Danish, Icelandic bioacoustician, who I've known and worked with for a long time, and she escorted us on the Dardanelles out on with Tony and Jana out on which I think was probably the first exploratory trip. Seek out the elusive blue whale. I tell you what, to say it's the largest animal that's ever lived, they're really difficult to find, as we all know.
Francesca, may I ask a question? Yeah, because I mean, clearly a lot of this was born out of the conditions that the pandemic kind of brought to us, right? And a lot of what has become visible through the pandemic and everything that came after, right, also talks to all of the injustices, systemic injustices that have been amplified and have been made visible, I guess, to a way larger audience than were aware of them before. And a word that comes up over and over and over again is something that relates back to the conversation that we're having, and it's the act of listening, right? It's an act of as a decolonial act, it's the act of listening. And Chris, what strikes me is this moment where you, as being a rock star, all of a sudden turn into the subversive act of listening, right? From broadcasting from out to in, and somehow you've turned this into an art form, right? And like you said, all of a sudden, by it being disguised as an artwork, we are being transported. So do you think we need to learn to listen again?
That's a really good point, Marcus, particularly at this point in time, because I think many people, many of us have rediscovered that because we live in such, and I know Francesca is particularly interested in noise in the oceans, as we all are, but noise on the land, it plagues us most of the time, or it did do, certainly until March. And I'm convinced that's one reason why many of us, well, not me, but a lot of people walk around with iPod earbuds in. They're not listening to music, they're excluding all the noise pollution that's around them. And it's responsible for all sorts of things, sick building syndrome, and people stress, anxiety, and you go home at the end of the day with headaches or feeling nauseous or unable to concentrate, unable to communicate. So we're bombarded by noise pollution. So people don't listen. We hear everything, but we didn't listen. What happened in March, certainly at my latitude, 55 north, was that people rediscovered listening. They rediscovered the sounds on their doorstep. I got lots of messages and mails about doing programs, about people starting to listen. I had radio producers in London said, my God, I've heard blackbirds in my streets for the first time. Were they always there? You simply couldn't hear them before. Corollary of that was interesting is that birds have had a particularly good season this year because they've been able to hear each other. And this has enabled us to reconnect with noise pollution in the oceans, because certainly the birds in my back garden, we have a resident blackbird, which is sort of fight actually this morning with another blackbird for the winter territory. But I put a microphone out to record blackbirds in our back garden. We've got a small suburban back garden here in Newcastle. And the one thing I discovered is I could not only hear the blackbird at the top of the conifer tree in our garden, I could hear all the surrounding blackbirds in adjacent gardens and territories, which I'd never heard before. Now, if that blackbird could hear those songs, if I could hear that song, that blackbird could certainly do it. And that's why they upped their game. They suddenly realized, Christ, I've got all this competition I didn't hear before from the neighbors at number 22 and the people over the back at the farm. Because if the males can hear each other, the females can. And what they're most likely to do is think, oh, actually, quite like the sound of him down the road at number 17. I'm going to go over there, mate with him and come back, mate with my regular mate. And then when the nest, when the eggs are laid, quite often have a very mixed gene pool. So the females are completely unfaithful to the male in their territory because they'll go and mate with several other males to increase the strength of their gene pool. That's been exaggerated this year, I'm certain, because of the lack of noise pollution. It's very quickly resolved, and that brings me to the point, Francesca's idea of too much noise in the oceans, because when the noise pollution stopped, as it did in March this year, airborne noise pollution, aircraft, traffic noise, the wildlife, the natural world, responded to that very quickly. Because when the pollution goes away, noise pollution goes away, it stops. The problem's gone, the problem's solved. And the animal world responded very quickly. And I know, Francesca, I'd like to hear something about the work that you've been doing, the studies you've been doing about the response of animals in the ocean to noise pollution.
Thanks for bringing that up, because obviously you mentioned something that I think is key that I'd forgotten, and I think most of us have, is how important sound was to our survival as a species, and how hearing and being able to listen to incoming danger or when you're hunting and communicating, or even looking for a mate. Those are all things that our species survival depends on. And I had never really thought of it as it's our survival, because part of what I was concerned about is the amount of ocean pollution, sound pollution that we just pump into the ocean since the beginning of industrialization, has massively impacted the communication skills and possibilities of all the mammalian populations, because we tend to focus this very much along the continental shelves, because that's where we're prospecting for oil. That's where the shipping lanes are that cross and roll straight over most of the migration paths of the whales and the dolphins and all mammalian, also the cod routes, and all of the movement of so many species is along these continental shelves, because they're the most nutrient rich areas. And this huge impact that we have, which is now really being scientifically proven, that it impacts the brains and the eyes of, because there's so much blood vessels being burst in the heads of these amazing creatures, that they completely lose their way. And the intelligence and the communication power of whales and dolphins is so well documented. For people to actually accuse them of beaching themselves because they're following just one lost species, one lost member of their pod off their normal route, is so unthinkable to me. That and the rush that the poor scientists have to make to reach these beached carcasses in order to perform the autopsies on them, to demonstrate and to prove over and over again that these lost species that have gone off their routes is clearly because of disorientation, if not suicide, because of the massive organ failure that they've been subjected to and the pain that they must be subjected to, let alone decompression sickness that happens to many of them whilst they dive below as far deeper than they should in order to avoid this cacophony of sound that is on the surface. And you mentioned in our previous conversation also that even there were some Air Force jets that were impacting the behavior of orcas, because we forget that the sounds of airplanes as well, not only of ships and of sonic, seismic air guns and so on, that are used in all of this underwater exploration that we continue to do, to go further and further and deeper into the bottom of the ocean in order to track possible pools of oil and gas. I mean, this is done in the most violent way, using instruments that have decibels of over 250 decibels. The container ships that are now becoming more and more in numbers and larger, because 250,000 tons of containers on one ship. There are now thousands of those ships out there, and they generate in low frequency about 190 decibels, which is, just to compare, about the sound of the volume of a SpaceX launch, which we've all been watching recently very excitedly. But I mean, in a SpaceX launch, humans would be kept hundreds of meters away from the launch site, because our entire bodies would be destroyed by these levels of sound. I mean, we basically tolerate about 90 decibels. Unless you go to a Yonsei and Carmichael concert, you might be exposed to a little bit more. But you know, these are our tolerance, and our physical tolerance and our organ tolerance is between absolute maximum 100 decibels. So anything over that is likely to cause, why would it not cause grievous bodily harm to a mammalian species in the water? And as you pointed out in the beginning, how fast sound travels in underwater, and that being a sort, every single species in that ocean is definitely susceptible to sound. There is not a single species, not just the whales, because we've become aware of the fact that they, you know, have been beaching themselves, tormented by these sounds, but every single species not only depends on sounds, but is subject to every single smallest particle of sound. And when you put your ears in the water and you hear this very strange, crackling, abstract sound that many scientists have still defied the world of science to tell us actually what this sound is. But it's maybe little particles of sand or of stone rolling around at the bottom of the sea, joined by a few snapping crabs, but other species that make little crackling sounds. But this is a sound that is, you hear everywhere in the ocean, everywhere you go, and it's microcosmic. It's tiny. It's what is causing it. So all of these massive sounds that we have, we've got one recording that I used in my lecture, performance lecture called Sounds Too Many, which is a sounds that was also used in a film, which was of orcas playing around and communicating. And they are the species that have the most sophisticated communication skills, and they have incredibly very, I would say, elaborate social relationships, and with a very, very strong accent on communication. And they were overrun by a ship that ran over them, and this was recorded a few years ago. And I wanted to see if Michael could play it for us right now, just to give an example of what we're talking about. Do we have that sound,
Yeah,
Michael?
can I hear it? That's powerful. I think that's you know, the equivalent for us is being plunged into dense fog, for which we can't, is completely disorienting. Those animals are living, communicating in that world with sound and vibration. To have that removed, it's like us being dropped into a room full of smoke or fog outside, where we're completely disoriented. We don't even know what's up or down. As Francesca was saying, that, I mean, I've got particular interest in orca. Recorded them around the world, from the Johnstone Straits, Vancouver Island, down to the Antarctic and up around the Lofoten Islands. And they are highly evolved animals. And I don't like to sort of anthropomorphize about things like this. But I mean, we are air-breathing mammals, as are orca. We evolved in the ocean as they did. And at some point, a long time ago, obviously, we decided, or we evolved to come out and live on the land. and stay as air-breathing mammals and evolved on dry land. Orca did the same thing. Then they made the choice, or it's not really a choice, but they evolved back into the oceans hundreds of millions of years ago. And that's where they chose to reside. Now think about it. We, as Francesca said, they've evolved very powerful, significant cultures and possibly even the language with some of the work that's been done. And they roam around 70% of this planet. Nothing messes about with orcas. They are the apex predator of this planet. Highly successful, highly evolved family groups in pods. They live on 70% of the planet. We live on the dry bits, the 30% dry bits in between, sit up here paying 20% VAT, suffering all the vagaries of the coronavirus. Orca live on the other 70% of the planet. Their brains are several times larger than ours. Now, take a step back. Who's the smartest?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. No, it's also a challenge of imagination for us, right? It's like we're, as you say, we've. I mean, there's clearly this difference between atmosphere and water, right? And we've our sensory system is evolved to see, and we're kind of mainly turned into visual creatures. No, this is whatever we this is the sense that we seem to use most, right? Even if we if we stand at the shore and look at the ocean, right, all we see is the surface. There's so much life under the surface, but which rarely breaks the surface. So for us to make that abstraction, to actually imagine what's underneath, which is that which we can't see, is completely out of our reach. Also, I think the distances that marine creatures communicate across, right, because sound travels so much faster, not relying on their vision, because the vision is clearly through the quality of the water, completely a different and much lesser sense than sound. I mean, we also see sharks and how they have evolved to pick up electrostatic, right? How creatures, species that are evolving in water are relying on completely different senses than just the visual sense, is really hard for us to imagine. On the other hand, I think what it amplifies also is this need for exploitative, extractive capitalism, right? That is just above any other or so many other things, right? So that we don't have the capacity to listen anymore, to imagine how this sound interferes into other species' life, right? But it's like it's necessary to do, like Francesca says, the sonic exploration of potential new oil and gas fields in the ocean, all of the shipping traffic to ship goods from A to B. I think there's still an enormous amount of logistics happening on the ocean, where we always think they fly through there, but it's actually most of the logistics is happening at sea. And I think it lies so far out of our consideration that especially this is inflicted on the ocean and the marine species.
I think, without wanting to oversimplify, that's a really good point you make, Marcus. That's why projects like Freakwave are not only interesting but significant, because this isn't, it's not just some artistic whim that's made this come about, this collaboration between the Academy and Carmichael. It's because it's not only very interesting and engaging, it's worthwhile because it actually draws people in to those sounds that you were just talking about and what Francesca's alluded to, that are not available to us. And the more people discover about, being able to play with the mixer and enjoy and engage, spend an evening doing that, tuning in, diving into the mixer and playing with it. And it is very compulsive, I think, once you start to get involved. But it's then taking that step back and thinking about those sounds and then making that connection with what's under the surface. And then thinking about that and then seeing articles like in the Seattle News about the effects of jets, those training jets, the growler jets affecting behavior, 30 meters below the surface. That people will start to think, because if people know about something, that's the first step to caring about it and then making a decision to, what we're doing to look after what's our responsibility for these animals. Again, I repeat, within the largest habitat on the planet. And that sense of engagement is one of the worthwhile outcomes, I think, from Freakway. And connecting that with a podcast that we've just produced, where there is some engagement with the scientific community who've taken this up, and people like Valeria Vagaras and Leah Barclay, who are then doing really interesting, cutting-edge work. And that's one of the things I hope the podcast will connect people with more widely as well.
Well, when you talk about the scale and the volume of the ocean, I mean, one of the statistics that I fell in love with when I did my work, my research for Sounds Too Many, was that 98% of all livable space on the planet is in the ocean. And with an average depth of 3,700 meters, that allows for 1,375,000,000 cubic square kilometers of ocean. That is such an incredibly vast space. And I think the misconception is, because there's so much of it, its resources are limitless, and it's dumping our dumping power into it without having an impact is endless. And these are the most critical misconceptions that the human race has about the ocean, and that livelihood depends on the health of the ocean, depends on its inhabitants. It can't be just an empty water mass with farmed fish for us to eat. It has to have this whole biodiversity, from the zooplankton all the way to the majestic, evasive blue whale that you spend your last few years pursuing. And that every single one of those life forms, from the bottom to the top of the food chain in the ocean, is subjected to this noise, and this impacts it. It either kills it, or it just renders its navigation impossible. So like you were saying, that the whales and the mammalians, but not only them, need this in order to communicate, to find each other a mate. And as you say, same with the story with the birds. Whales also want to mate outside of their genetic pool. And there have been some wonderful stories of tracing some of the whale songs from one group of whales that swim only in the South Sea, with mixing with songs from this North Ocean. Because if that's happening, then, whales are hearing calls and songs from another tribe of whales, and trying to replicate that to attract females in a different way. So it is the song of the loudest and the most beautiful songs. And we've been together recording sounds of whales in the Silverbanks, actually. And it was impossible just to get the sound of one whale. That was your big quest. You wanted one whale, one singer, not this cacophony of so many other. And we went miles and miles and miles out to find this one whale. And that was the experience that changed my life. And I was on this boat, this little Zodiac with you and Yana. and you gave me your earphones to listen. And I went into a complete trance listening to these wells. And not only did it pacify me immensely, it just gave me a sense of sound and of listening that I had never experienced before. It helped me completely accept another reality that I had never been in touch with before. It grew inside me a passion for sound that has been with me for a while now, as you know, but in particular in the sense of its importance and its vitality in the ocean. Because if you imagine that a baleen whale can hear a thunderstorm thousands of miles away and will then navigate towards it, because that storm will churn up the ocean and actually generate these nutrients that this whale needs to survive. Or if a humpback can hear another tribe of whales far enough away and try to emulate their songs and learn from those, because its reproduction and its survival of its species depend on it. Or a blue whale navigating underneath the ice floes of Antarctica, or, you know, will need to be able to come up for air, or in particular the humpbacks. I mean, this is so much about hunting, it's about navigation, it's about survival, it's about what you described us humans needing to do. The value of sound and silence from all of this industrial pollution is critical to the survival of the ocean. And yes, we have to understand about less fishing, we have to understand about less exploitation, we have to less pollution, we need less plastic, but we also need less sound pollution. And to do this, to research this, we collected sounds of so many different things, from sonic, submarine sonic sounds to all sorts of exploitative. And it's incredible to me when I discovered the volumes, the decibels at which this is impounding the ocean. And I think this project in itself really brought this through, and I'm really passionate on the stage as a platform for different artworks that were able to be produced through an incredible collaborative spirit, because we've not mentioned, we've mentioned it, but I think that the spirit of collaboration for this particular project has been huge. And that's something that I felt really became very apparent between us and the artists that we've worked with on stage productions, has been this incredible sense of camaraderie, of community, of working together, and particularly of collaboration, so that we don't feel so alone during these lockdowns, again, as we are finding ourselves in a second lockdown that was predicted. And then we knew this was going to happen if we didn't take care, and we didn't take care. So we are now being punished. And this second episode of COVID is like so much worse than the first. And this may last for a while. And I think that this idea that we as people can work together into this sense of community through the stage and bring up these topics that are so important to us all. I mean, ocean sound pollution has been very, very important to me, and it is to you. And doing Freakwave on stage has been an opportunity to talk about that. And in your podcast, Chris, you brought so many voices together that amplify this critical element that I think a lot of people underestimate or undervalue, especially like you mentioned that Cousteau talked about the silent ocean. So many people consider it silent. And, even just swimming sometimes, and you hear the sound of these boats, it's so harmful, and it's so disturbing to one's own peace of mind. But I'm really grateful for Carmichael to have put all these voices together, because to have, when I heard that there was over 70 contributors to Stage, that opened up to me also how many interesting artists are working with sound. This is such an incredible, powerful medium. And I think it's important to say that it's a medium that I think, as we know, it surges our emotions. I mean, of course, we all know that, crying at the opera house is something very common to most. But, crying when you're listening to Wells, and in particular, I've always found your compositions, Chris, to be very evocative of nature, to the point where it's nature that makes you cry. But like when you go on walks and something, the combination of the sounds of nature and of course its beauty really rise up emotions to us. But when we walk back into our cities and we drive back home and we listen to, and we're deafened by this cacophony, and I'm suffering from hearing loss since a long time. And this impacts my life terribly, and I'm very aware of the amount of noise outside, because when it disappears, as you mentioned, during lockdown, it was incredible. We all noticed how much nature sounds like, how loud it is, and that we are constantly deafened by the sounds of our industrialized world around us. So using sound as a medium to convey the emotions that people feel when they are in touch with nature, it's, I think, a very beautiful thing. And the work that you and Jana have been doing has obviously been very important to TBA 21. But I wanted to go back just to my first question, is how you and Carmichael, work with sound very, very differently, but you collaborate together and you work together on these incredible projects. I mean, what would you advise people to do other than listen more? But how would you suggest to somebody to listen better? What's the best way of learning to listen? Because I think we don't listen.
Well, it's very simple. We just need to re-engage. And from my point of view, turn your phone off. Get up early for a start and put your head out of your bedroom window. You don't have to go to the other side of the planet to hear the most astonishing, beautiful, evocative, stimulating, tranquil sounds. Just even in winter, we're all, I imagine, in the northern hemisphere at the moment. Just do that. Just take some time out, be kinder to yourself. Shut up and go outside and listen.
Carmichael?
That's the best place to start.
Sorry, Carmichael, what's your advice on how to listen?
Well, I can then take it from the other side. I would say that listening to noise around us, also in combination with listening to very harsh electronic music, very kind of rough sounds, can also teach you something. And if we go back to that sound from that ship when it disturbs the orcas coming in, that really low frequency sound with this high frequency, dirty kind of sound that came in. And you can sort of compare this and you can learn from this, and then you realize this motor and this ship is really badly built. I mean, totally. It's designed from like 100 years ago, from the beginning of industrialization, right? And it's because you haven't listened to the motors. I mean, I wouldn't say that motors are really bad. I mean, I would say that a person that loves Harley Davidson motorcycles can hear when the motor in this Harley Davidson 1200cc is actually sounding really beautiful, or something. But these most of these ships and these airplanes, the turbines from the jet motors of airplanes, is really badly designed, and I think sound people should listen to the sound, listen to the noise, and try to see how can we make this better. How can we avoid to have these total disformations in sound? Because if you have harmony in sound, then I would suppose that our fellow mammals would like these harmonies too. You know, I mean, it's about this learning what noise is. So that's my kind of counterpart from Chris's idea, which comes together. I mean, him and me, we come together really well. I go from one side and he goes from the other side.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're right. Come on. Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really
Yeah.
good conclusion.
Because we have a tendency to say no to noise and to shut it off and try to kind of you disturb from it. No, this is not the way to do it. The way to do it is to refine it and mix it better.
Thanks so much, Carmichael. Marcus, have you got a final word you'd like to join in this wrap up? Because I feel like we haven't heard from you for the last few minutes, so I wanted to ask you about listening, maybe. You're muted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now I'm. Well, I think, just taking what Carmichael and Chris have just said, I think it's an understanding that we have a responsibility for what we emit, right? It's like that this has a tremendous impact on on things that go beyond our vision, right? And I think this is we need to create an awareness for that, and we need to take this responsibility for our being on this planet.
Totally agree. Marcus, thank you so much. Carmichael, it's been a great pleasure. And Chris, wonderful to be in touch with you again. Thank you all for your contributions today.
And thank you, Francesca, for having us.
Okay, speak to you soon. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Ciao.